The coal dust tastes like blood and metal in Stefan Kowalski's mouth as his pickaxe bites into the seam that shouldn't exist. 40 feet below the streets of Katowice, in tunnels that his grandfather carved and his father expanded, Stefan discovers that someone else has been digging. Not miners following coal veins with the patient precision that 3 generations of Kowalski men learned from stone and darkness. Someone else. Someone who cuts straight lines through solid rock with mechanical efficiency, who builds supports from steel rather than timber, who leaves behind the particular smell of German engineering and military purpose. The tunnel that Stefan's pickaxe reveals runs perpendicular to the mine shaft where he's worked since he was 14, before the war, before the occupation, before his world became a place where Polish coal-fed German war machines and Polish miners became slave laborers in their own ancestral workings. The new tunnel is wider than mining passages, taller than practical excavation requires, lined with concrete that speaks of permanent installation rather than temporary extraction. Most importantly, it connects to something larger, something that echoes with the sound of voices speaking German in the disciplined cadences that mean military rather than civilian, occupation rather than cooperation. Stefan extinguishes his lamp and listens. Through the darkness that has been his workplace and sanctuary for 26 years, he hears the unmistakable rhythm of organized movement, the percussion of military equipment transported through underground passages, the particular acoustic signature of an army that has learned to move beneath the surface where resistance fighters cannot observe, cannot report, cannot interfere with tactical operations that depend on surprise and concealment for their effectiveness. But they don't know about Stefan. They don't know that one Polish miner with intimate knowledge of underground geography is about to transform their tactical advantage into strategic catastrophe, their carefully planned movement into deadly trap, their sophisticated tunnel network into a tomb that will hold an entire SS battalion until the coal dust settles and the war moves on without them. This is September 1943. The German occupation of Poland has entered its 4th year of systematic brutality, disguised as administrative efficiency, of cultural elimination presented as modernization, of genocide implemented through bureaucratic procedures that make mass murder feel like paperwork rather than human catastrophe. In the Silesian coal mines that fueled German industry and German warfare, Polish miners work under conditions that blur the line between employment and slavery, between industrial labor and slow execution, between survival and collaboration. The SS has discovered that coal mines provide excellent infrastructure for military movement, offering concealed transportation routes that avoid partisan observation, underground storage facilities that protect equipment from Allied bombing, communication networks that operate independently of surface installations that resistance fighters might target or sabotage. What they haven't considered is that coal mines also provide excellent infrastructure for resistance activities, offering concealed meeting places, hidden weapon caches, escape routes that connect to surface locations miles from suspected entrances. Stefan Kowalski understands both possibilities because he has spent his adult life navigating the complex relationship between survival and resistance, between protecting his family and protecting his conscience, between the practical requirements of staying alive under occupation and the moral requirements of remaining human, despite systematic pressure to abandon human values in favor of efficient collaboration with systems designed to eliminate his people through industrial methods. The decision to investigate the German tunnel comes not from heroic impulses, but from practical necessity. Stefan needs to understand what the SS is building beneath his workplace, how their activities might affect the safety of Polish workers who depend on familiar tunnel networks for survival during cave-ins, explosions, and the routine industrial accidents that kill miners with bureaucratic regularity, whether they live under democracy or dictatorship. But he also needs to assess whether German underground activities create opportunities for resistance work that balances the constant calculation between action and caution that defines life under occupation. The tunnel network that Stefan discovers exceeds anything he imagined German engineering might attempt in occupied territory. Miles of interconnected passages, reinforced with steel and concrete, ventilated with mechanical systems that provide fresh air circulation, illuminated with electrical installations that operate independently of municipal power systems that partisan sabotage might target. The tunnels connect coal mines to rail yards, industrial facilities to military installations, administrative buildings to communication centers. It's an underground city designed to allow German forces to operate beneath Polish territory without exposing themselves to surface observation or resistance interference. But Stefan recognizes something that German engineers missed. The tunnel network depends on existing mine shafts for access, ventilation, and structural support. The sophisticated German construction interfaces with Polish mining infrastructure at dozens of critical points where military efficiency meets industrial reality, where theoretical engineering encounters practical excavation, where occupying force assumptions about underground geography collide with local knowledge accumulated through generations of working beneath the surface. The weakness exists at junction points where German tunnels connect to Polish mine shafts, where military construction meets civilian infrastructure, where standardized German engineering encounters the improvised solutions that miners develop when dealing with geological irregularities that textbook procedures cannot accommodate. These connection points represent structural vulnerabilities that German engineers probably considered and dismissed as acceptable risks, but that Stefan recognizes as catastrophic failure points if someone with intimate knowledge of underground systems decides to exploit them. The sabotage plan develops over 3 weeks of careful observation, precise measurement, and the kind of systematic analysis that good miners bring to problems that require understanding how underground systems respond to stress, pressure, and controlled demolition. Stefan maps the German tunnel network with the thoroughness that his work demands, identifying load-bearing supports, ventilation dependencies, and the critical path routing that allows military personnel to move from entry points to destinations without surface exposure. But more importantly, he identifies the single point of failure that German engineering overlooks, because it assumes that Polish mining infrastructure will continue operating according to pre-war patterns, that civilian workers will maintain industrial systems regardless of their political loyalties, that local knowledge represents resource rather than threat when applied by people who understand how to turn familiar systems into weapons against unfamiliar occupiers. The critical vulnerability exists where the main German tunnel crosses beneath the flooded section of Mine Shaft 7, an abandoned working that Stefan's father helped excavate before geological surveys revealed unstable soil conditions that made continued mining too dangerous for practical extraction. The German tunnel passes directly beneath the flooded shaft, depending on Polish pumping systems to maintain water levels that prevent catastrophic flooding of military passages that were designed for troop movement rather than aquatic conditions. Stefan understands that stopping the pumps will flood the German tunnel system within hours, creating underwater conditions that will make military movement impossible and emergency evacuation extremely difficult. But he also understands that selective pump failure might create controlled flooding that traps German forces without killing them immediately, transforming military advantage into humanitarian crisis that achieves strategic objectives without crossing the moral boundaries that separate resistance from terrorism, military action from mass murder. The implementation requires technical knowledge that Stefan possesses through 26 years of mining experience, mechanical skills that his father taught him for maintaining equipment under conditions where replacement parts are scarce and repair expertise is expensive, and the particular kind of moral courage that allows someone to take action that will certainly result in German military casualties and possibly result in brutal retaliation against Polish civilian populations. But Stefan also possesses something equally important: intimate knowledge of German routine patterns, SS personnel schedules, and the tactical procedures that military forces follow when using tunnel networks for troop movement and equipment transportation. Through 3 weeks of careful observation, he has learned that Battalion 23 of the SS Totenkopf Division conducts weekly underground movement exercises every Thursday morning, using the tunnel network to practice rapid deployment from concealed positions to surface objectives that simulate resistance strongholds and partisan meeting locations. The battalion follows predictable routes, maintains standard timing, operates according to military protocols that prioritize efficiency over flexibility, coordination over improvisation. They enter the tunnel system at 0600 hours through the main access point near the rail yard, follow established pathways to predetermined positions, conduct training exercises that assume underground movement provides tactical advantage rather than strategic vulnerability, then return to surface installations through the same routes they used for entry. Stefan calculates that selective pump failure 30 minutes after Battalion 23 enters the tunnel system will create flooding conditions that prevent both forward movement and tactical withdrawal, trapping approximately 400 SS personnel in underground passages that become increasingly dangerous as water levels rise beyond the capacity of emergency drainage systems to accommodate. The flooding will not be immediately fatal, but it will eliminate military effectiveness and require extensive rescue operations that expose German forces to surface vulnerability while attempting to extract trapped personnel from compromised positions. The moral calculation involves balancing certain German military casualties against probable Polish civilian retaliation, immediate tactical advantage against long-term strategic consequences, the satisfaction of striking back against occupying forces against the practical requirements of protecting family and community from the brutal efficiency that German forces employ when responding to resistance activities that threaten military personnel rather than simply disrupting equipment or industrial operations. Stefan decides that 400 SS personnel trapped underground represents acceptable cost for the tactical advantage of eliminating an entire battalion from active duty, the strategic benefit of demonstrating that German underground networks are vulnerable to local knowledge and sabotage expertise, and the psychological impact of proving that Polish resistance possesses both the capability and determination to strike at German forces when they assume they are protected by superior technology and tactical preparation. Thursday morning arrives with the gray light that filters through coal dust and industrial smoke, the particular dawn atmosphere of occupied territory where hope and despair compete for psychological territory in the space between sleeping and waking, between private thought and public compliance, between the person you are when no one is watching and the person you must appear to be when everyone is watching for signs of disloyalty that justify brutal correction. Stefan arrives at the mine complex at 05:30 hours, 30 minutes before his normal shift begins, carrying the tools and equipment that his sabotage plan requires, disguised as routine maintenance supplies for pump systems that require constant attention to function reliably under the stress of draining water from abandoned shafts that geological instability makes permanently problematic. He works with the calm efficiency that 26 years of dangerous industrial labor has taught him, checking connections, adjusting pressures, making small modifications that will cascade into major system failures precisely 30 minutes after SS Battalion 23 enters the underground network for their weekly training exercise. At 0600 hours, Stefan watches through a concealed observation point as German forces begin their descent into the tunnel system, 400 personnel moving with military precision down access shafts that connect surface installations to underground passages, carrying equipment that assumes tactical advantage rather than defensive necessity, following procedures that prioritize speed and coordination over caution and contingency planning. The SS officers wear the confident expressions of people who believe they control the tactical environment, who trust their technology and training to provide solutions to any problems that resistance forces might create. Stefan activates the pump modifications at 0630 hours, 30 minutes, after the last German soldier disappears into underground passages that suddenly begin transforming from tactical advantage to strategic trap. The pump failures occur gradually, systematically, creating flooding conditions that appear to result from mechanical breakdown rather than deliberate sabotage, equipment failure rather than resistance activity. Water begins rising in Mine Shaft 7 with the inexorable patience that gravity brings to geological processes, seeping through soil layers, following underground channels, seeking the lowest points in tunnel networks that German engineers designed for military efficiency rather than aquatic resistance. The flooding reaches German tunnel levels at 0700 hours, creating ankle-deep water conditions that slow movement without creating immediate danger, suggesting equipment malfunction rather than enemy action. But the water continues rising with mechanical persistence, reaching knee-deep levels that make tactical movement extremely difficult, chest-deep conditions that eliminate combat effectiveness, neck-deep situations that transform military personnel into survivors focused on breathing rather than fighting. SS Battalion 23 finds itself trapped in underground passages that fill with water faster than emergency procedures can accommodate, surrounded by flooding that makes retreat impossible and advance suicidal, equipped for land combat rather than aquatic survival. The tunnel network that provided tactical advantage for 3 weeks of training exercises becomes an underwater maze where military organization becomes liability rather than asset, where unit cohesion becomes deadly when leaders insist on maintaining formation in conditions that require individual survival decisions rather than collective tactical responses. The German forces attempt standard emergency procedures that assume surface support, reliable communication, and rescue capabilities that depend on equipment and personnel that remain functional during crisis situations. But the flooding eliminates electrical systems, disrupts radio communication, and creates emergency conditions that exceed the capacity of surface installations to address through routine military protocols. Battalion 23 becomes 400 individual soldiers trying to survive underground aquatic conditions using equipment designed for land warfare and training that assumed tactical superiority rather than defensive desperation. Stefan monitors the situation from his concealed position, using familiar mine shaft access points to observe German emergency response activities that reveal the chaos developing beneath the surface as military organization dissolves into survival behavior, as tactical planning becomes irrelevant in the face of rising water that follows geological rather than military logic. He sees German officers attempting to coordinate rescue operations that require resources and expertise that military training never provided. Technical knowledge that occupying forces lack because they assumed Polish infrastructure would remain reliable rather than becoming weaponized against them. The water reaches maximum levels at 1200 hours, 6 hours after Stefan activated the pump modifications, creating underground conditions that eliminate German tactical effectiveness for at least 48 hours, while rescue operations attempt to drain passages that geological conditions make extremely difficult to empty quickly. SS Battalion 23 transforms from active military threat to humanitarian crisis, from tactical asset to strategic liability, from occupying force to trapped victims requiring extensive rescue resources that must be diverted from other military operations to address the emergency that one Polish miner created using intimate knowledge of systems that German engineers thought they understood. German rescue efforts require 3 days of intensive labor, specialized equipment, and technical expertise that must be imported from Germany because local Polish workers refuse to assist in operations that would restore SS tactical capability. The battalion that enters the tunnel system for routine training exercise emerges 72 hours later as 400 soldiers suffering from hypothermia, exhaustion, and the psychological trauma that develops when military personnel discover that their tactical advantages can become deadly disadvantages when confronted by resistance fighters who possess superior knowledge of local conditions and systems. But Stefan's sabotage achieves objectives beyond eliminating SS Battalion 23 from active duty. German confidence in underground tunnel networks suffers permanent damage that affects tactical planning throughout occupied Poland. Military commanders begin questioning the reliability of infrastructure that depends on cooperation from civilian populations whose loyalty cannot be guaranteed through standard occupational procedures. The psychological impact of demonstrated vulnerability spreads through German forces who understand that local knowledge can transform familiar environment into hostile territory faster than military protocols can adapt to changing conditions. The investigation that follows Stefan's sabotage reveals the technical sophistication required to create systematic pump failures that appear mechanical rather than deliberate, the intimate knowledge of mine systems necessary to predict flooding patterns accurately, and the careful planning required to coordinate sabotage timing with German military schedules. SS investigators recognize that Polish resistance possesses technical capabilities and strategic intelligence that make underground military operations extremely vulnerable to local sabotage efforts that German engineering cannot prevent through standard security procedures. Stefan continues working in the coal mines for 18 months after his sabotage operation, maintaining the careful balance between survival and resistance that defines life under occupation, contributing to coal production that fuels German war machinery while simultaneously supporting resistance activities that undermine German military effectiveness through methods that occupying forces cannot easily detect or prevent. His tunnel sabotage becomes part of resistance legend that inspires other acts of technical sabotage against German infrastructure, demonstrating that intimate local knowledge represents strategic weapon when applied by people who understand how to transform familiar systems into tools for liberation. The war ends in May 1945. Stefan survives liberation, reconstruction, and the complex political changes that transform occupied Poland into Soviet satellite state, creating new forms of oppression that require different strategies for maintaining dignity and autonomy under systems designed to eliminate individual resistance to collective conformity. His wartime sabotage experience proves valuable during post-war resistance activities that oppose Soviet control using similar techniques of technical knowledge applied against infrastructure that authoritarian governments depend on for social control and political oppression. Years later, when historians document Polish resistance activities during German occupation, Stefan's tunnel sabotage appears in classified reports that acknowledge the strategic importance of technical knowledge as resistance weapon, the effectiveness of infrastructure sabotage against occupying forces, and the particular vulnerability that modern military operations develop when they depend on local systems that hostile populations can manipulate using expertise that formal military training cannot provide or predict. The coal mines of Silesia continue operation under various political systems, providing energy resources for Polish industry and European markets, employing miners who understand the dangerous relationship between industrial necessity and political control, between technical knowledge and resistance capability. The tunnels that Stefan flooded in 1943 remain sealed, transformed from military infrastructure into underground monument, to the moment when one Polish miner used intimate knowledge of familiar systems to trap an entire SS battalion, demonstrating that local expertise represents strategic weapon when applied by people who understand that survival sometimes requires turning the tools of daily labor into instruments of liberation. The mine shaft markers that identify flooded sections include no memorial plaques, no historical recognition of the sabotage that occurred there, no acknowledgement of Stefan's transformation of routine pump maintenance into strategic resistance operation. But sometimes, when mining equipment fails and workers must improvise solutions using available materials and accumulated knowledge, they remember the story of the miner who understood that intimate familiarity with industrial systems provides advantages that no amount of military training or technological sophistication can overcome when confronted by people who know how to make familiar environment hostile to unwelcome occupiers. The coal dust still tastes like blood and metal. The tunnels still echo with the sounds of industrial labor and human survival. And deep beneath the surface, in passages that hold the memory of 400 SS soldiers, learning that tactical advantage can become strategic trap when local knowledge meets occupying force assumptions, the darkness preserves the lesson that Stefan Kowalski taught, that resistance begins with understanding how familiar systems work, continues with recognizing how those systems can be modified, and succeeds when technical knowledge becomes weapon for liberation rather than tool for oppression. If stories like this remind you that expertise represents power, that local knowledge provides strategic advantage against occupying forces, that one person with intimate understanding of familiar systems can challenge entire military organizations, then perhaps there are other moments when technical knowledge became resistance weapon worth remembering, worth honoring, worth carrying forward into whatever challenges require us to understand that survival sometimes depends on turning the tools of daily labor into instruments of liberation.